Hello and welcome to another episode of A Coffee with Chris. As always, brought to you in association with our charity partner, 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀, who help local people affected by cancer, and proudly sponsored by Hill Coaching Company, here to help you become a better version of yourself today. Now, let's welcome today's guest. I'm delighted to have managed to get him on the show. It's the founder of Unearthed, Louis Fulcher. These guys specialize in brand strategy, brand voice, and brand identity. Louis, let's kick off with this first question to start off with. What actually is brand positioning? Why should business owners actually care about this?
Well, firstly, before we dive into that, thank you for the warm welcome. You didn't have to work too hard to get me on there. It's a pleasure to join you, and also a shout out to Oliver Hill as well, a great guy. So thanks again for having me. And brand positioning, what is it? Very simply, it is exactly how your brand is perceived in the market. So when you talk about brand, it could be made up of lots of different components. A lot of people think it's your colors and your logo primarily. If you ask most people, it'd be, let's say your brand, and they'd send you a JPEG of their logo. Not it at all. And actually, that's probably one of the last bits we get to. When it comes to positioning, a true position actually influences so many things across the business. A good brand positioning can not only influence your brand identity, it could influence your product line, how you shape your products, how you sell your products. It could be, say you're talking about a D2C business, it could even influence things like, where is your shop positioned? Is it on a high street? Is it in a sort of a boutique little shopping outlet? It could influence so many different things, and it's not just how you look.
Love that, Louis. I'm really fearful that business owners might think this is just fluffy marketing nonsense, and it's not that, is it?
It's not at all. It's not at all. Like, obviously, I think why that gets confused is because a lot of it is done badly. When you sort of talk about your brand position, your brand foundation, sort of the core aspect of your brand, I think so many businesses have been burnt by, you get a corporate person come into the business and tells you what your values should be, and your values are always fun, kind, caring, and they're not values. They're things which you should just have as part of being parcel of being a human being. Brand position is actually really, really important, and we've seen it actually sort of transform businesses sort of firsthand. I can give you an example. Actually, Fulfilled, an e-commerce recruitment business, and one of their sort of core purposes of why they do what they do is because they wanted to do stuff differently as a recruitment agency. I think recruitment agencies typically have a bit of a bad rap for being, they're these sort of sharky individuals. They try and get the biggest fee out of you as they can, and it's always been a little bit like that. And obviously, Luke Plain, top guy, and he was like, we actually want to do stuff differently and not be that kind of person. And because of that, that is almost like their mission. And yes, there's a little bit of work to sort of articulate that and tell that as sort of their brand story, but actually it influenced the way they've even productized their sort of solutions. So they've got a service now which they've introduced this year called Committed Search, where instead of sort of charging your 15, 20, 25, 30% fees for placements, they've halved them because that's what people wanted, and they've worked out a way to make that work for both people. And that actually, you think that's more of a sales technique, but it actually all comes back to the brand. And yes, we want to do stuff differently. We want to do stuff for our customers. How can we use that to influence how we actually operate as a business? So it can really, really sort of positively impact that kind of stuff, as well, as opposed to just how you look and feel.
Love that, Louis. I'd actually completely forgotten that you'd done some exceptional work for Fulfilled Talent. Actually, Luke is a former guest on the Coffee with Chris, speaking about how a business can improve their employer brand. So we had some incredible insights from him. So I love the fact that you've mentioned Luke. Shout out to Luke. And linked to your work that you've done, Louis, and to mitigate against the perhaps perception that brand positioning is fluffy marketing nonsense. What are the actual legitimate steps that you take, perhaps the top line steps that you take with clients when they come your way and say, right, Louis, help me with my brand positioning? What's the sort of journey that you take them on?
I'd say there's two really, really important pieces of work that you need to do up front. One is what we call position mapping. So understanding where, so for you, for example, Chris, looking at sort of the other social media agencies that are in sort of occupy the space which, one, you're in at the moment, and perhaps two, the space that you want to occupy in the future. Understanding what makes them unique, what makes them good, what makes people resonate with those businesses. And it could be the types of niches that they sell into. It could be the way in which they deliver. It could be their tone of voice. It could be the content they create. It could be a whole host of things. And understanding what makes them really, really great. once you start mapping that out, you can then potentially see that actually this agency is sort of loads and loads of character and loads of fun, and they're, you know, completely wacky with their ideas. And then there's this business over here which are quite corporate and stale. We're actually probably somewhere in the middle, and that's fine, but there's the space which you need to occupy. So then what you then create from there sort of sits within that gap. So that sort of process is what we call position mapping, and it's something which every business could and should probably be doing. And then the other thing is speaking to your customers. And if it's not your customers, speaking to potential customers. And that all comes with actually having a really good understanding of who you sell to, which again is part of your brand. So once you really understand who you sell to, have conversations with them. Say, look, there's 3 or 4 brands here. What do you think to them? Which one would you want to work with and why? And that for me is the most important thing, which people just miss. Because if I said to anyone now, go away and create a brand, a lot of the time they'd look online, see something which looks cool, and it'd probably be due to their personal taste. They'd see, oh, we really like Nike or whoever, and they'd create a brand that looks like that. Actually, their customers don't. Their customers like that, and without asking those questions, you just don't know that.
That's really interesting, Louis. That almost like brand diagnosis piece at the start. It's like the really unsexy thing, I think. Not to offend you, I think just so many people jump to the let's just do the thing rather than doing the research, doing that proper positioning research, which I think is an incredible piece of wisdom, actually.
It's funny you say that, actually, but before we jump on, it's not something that you're aware of, and it's like a nice little segue into this, but we've found a way, which, well, I think to make that a little bit sexy and make it like a nice packaged thing. We've actually developed a product, what we call the brand benchmark.
Okay.
It's something that we literally run for free or just to cover the cost of the research. But basically what we do is we take a business like yourself. I'll use you as an example again. But all we need from you really is, okay, Chris, who do you sell to? So what person do you sell to? Say it could be, I don't know, a managing director at businesses between X amount and X amount in this industry. Okay, great. Now, who are your competitors? Who do you often go up against in a pitch? Or is there anyone in the past that you perhaps lost out to? Who are those businesses? And we usually try and cap it at 5. And then what we do is we get you plus 4 competitors, and we put your businesses in front of 5 of your ICPs, and we ask them a series of questions. So it could be, okay, how would you rank these 5 businesses in terms of perceived cost, in terms of how much fun do you think they are to work with? What services do you think they specialize in? And we'll ask them a series of quantitative and qualitative sort of questions. And what that enables us to do is go back to you, Chris, and say, look, you want to be occupying this space here, but in order to do so, everyone thinks you're the cheapest brand. I'm not saying this is the case.
No, it's fine.
People may think you're the cheapest brand. People may think that actually this business seems way more fun to work with than you. These businesses come across as a little bit bigger. And here's what they said about your website, your brand, your socials. And actually that paints a really clear picture for people to go away and think, oh shit, actually this is what people think about our brand. And sometimes like you get so stuck in that space of, we know what we are, we know what our brands are, we know what our customers want, but you don't.
Yes.
A lot of the time people are quite shocked by oh really, people do think that. And even we are sometimes we put them up against competitors who actually think, well, I actually think their brand may be perceived a little bit better than theirs. And sometimes it even surprises us. But until you ask those questions, you just don't know.
I think we might be almost leaking into a bit of mindset / coaching-ish conversation here, Louis, because I think there's maybe some egos on the line. I think there's maybe some vanity on the line. You actually do that really, almost cold facts don't care about feelings piece of what do your ICP actually think. You're going to get
some bad guy then.
No, I love that.
Exactly that.
Louis, forgive the perhaps selfish question here in the tangent, but something I'm noticing in your world, in my opinion, is that lots of businesses, small, medium, large, they are watering down / simplifying / modernizing their brands. And from a social media perspective, for example, and I think this is the right thing with regards to icons, is they're removing small font face to have almost just like their version of the Nike tick, their watermarks. It stands out on social, grabs attention. Great. The thing that I'm just a bit concerned about, Louis, is it's almost like the Appleification of brand positioning. Everyone's trying to be Apple or Nike or Coca-Cola, and What's your take on that, Louis? Is that the right step for all businesses?
I think there's probably a few things to that. I think one, the simplification actually comes around nowadays. There's lots of different sort of medias where your brand needs to be applied. So you need to make sure that it's consistent across digital, across social, across print, across out of home. Like there's lots of different things that you need to get your brand right for. And if there's lots of intricacies about your brand, there's lots of detail, often that won't be able to be sort of replicated across different touch points. So that's one thing, which is more of a, I guess, logistical thing. I think it's definitely a trend. I think people are sort of seeing there's that simplification and that people are doing that. But actually, I think one of the biggest things, which I don't think people talk about a lot, is now that great quality content is becoming more and more accessible, in demand, and expected as well. So a lot of the time, I think brands are relying, especially sort of B2C brands, are actually relying on the content, the video, the imagery, the photography to do the talking and the heavy lifting, and the brand actually just acts as a bit of an enabler for that. So you look at some of the really brilliant brands, and I'm going to mention these because I've been having a few conversations about them this week, but Pure Sport are sort of a supplement brand in sort of the D2C world. They specialize in sort of, it used to be supplements mainly for sort of running, and their brand is really stripped back, really, really minimalistic, but they've built a really solid tribe of runners. And a lot of that, again, comes back to the brand foundations. They've got a clear idea in terms of who they're selling to. They've got a clear idea on where they're positioned in the market. Their content is absolutely brilliant. They've built this really strong sort of almost like tribe-like sort of following. And as a result, their brand doesn't need to work hard. It's the content, it's the community building, it's all of that sort of stuff, all of those elements of the brand, which do so much of the heavy lift, and that actually their brand can be relatively pared back.
I love that, Louis. There's a real sort of balancing act that has to be done here, isn't there? And I wonder if this is somewhat linked to the terminology that you guys have on your website, which I'm really interested in, which is the brand dial. Because it's kind of like your answer to that last question was yes, but no, really. It's contextual, isn't it? Depending on the business, etc. So talk about Unearthed's concept of the brand dial. What do you mean by that? And how can that be applied to businesses to help with their brand positioning?
Yeah, so we apply this to pretty much every B2B brand that we create. It's particularly sort of important in B2B, I'd say, over B2C. And the reason being is because ultimately these corporate businesses or B2B businesses now can't afford to seem faceless. They've got to have some kind of personality and character about it. It's just the way that the world's going. And I think it's been massively accelerated by AI, so that now content is so easy to create. Everything's easy to create. So it's actually the human element now, which and sort of the emotional intelligence is pretty much the only intelligence we've got left. So I think it's really important for us to get that across. However, there's a time and place. So when it comes to your website, for example, there's still a sort of real need for the website to be clean, highly converting, do the job that you need the website to do. Yes, you can sort of build some character in there, but the primary purpose of that site is to get the user to, say, fill out an action or do what you need them to do. Social, however, a lot of that is, yes, there's a sort of a lead generative element to it, but a lot of it is brand awareness and building your tribe, building your following. And that's where you almost want to bring that guard down and show your personality and character. So what we always look to do with a brand, and it's mainly applied to the visual identity, but can also be applied to things like tone, although you need to be a little bit more consistent with that, is that building a brand which you can essentially dial up the personality and the fun and the character when you're talking about social media, employer brand, careers page, all of that kind of stuff. Dial it down a little bit more for things like website, for documentation. Dial it down a little bit more for things like, if you're talking about like contracts and stuff like that, things that need to be a little bit more pared back. But actually putting some rules in place so that, yes, you can dial the brand up and yes, you can dial it down without looking like two completely different brands. And I'll give you an example of that. Nike, for example, obviously one of the biggest businesses in the world, but you look at their socials, you look at their campaigns, and some of them are really wacky and absolutely brilliant. You go onto their website, clean as you like. So you need to be able to have that dial, but do it in a way which is consistent and considered.
That's really interesting, Louis. And I think that the brand dial is something that people should certainly be thinking about. I do believe also, like yourself, that people are making the mistake. So in so many of these conversations, Louis, it's really funny you should bring up, humanizing a brand. It's something that almost all of my guests are talking about now. It's something that is here and it's set to stay. You know, you can no longer just hide behind this corporate faceless thing. People don't trust it, but it is interesting, isn't it? Because you can go too far the other way, can't you? And it could perhaps make your business look too small, or perhaps maybe unprofessional, depending on the imagery, etc., that you're using. So fascinating to get your insights on that. Louis, what are the things that you see on social media, for example, with regards to brand, that give you the brand ick? What are the things that make you spit your coffee out in the morning?
Well, not a lot. There's no way I'm spitting my coffee out. What are the things I dislike? I think one of the things which most people get really wrong is me. So on socials, they're talking about us, talking about we do this, we do that, we're this, we're that. And humans by nature are quite selfish. We only really care about ourselves. So if you're seeing a business which is only posting about we do this, we do that, we do this, people don't care. You need to sort of talk to your audience and actually address their concerns or problems or whatever. So that's something which I see time and time again. And it's not even socials, it's on websites as well. If you land on a website and it's all we this, we that, I'm just like, oh no. It's such a quick win just to flip that narrative from we to you. It's such an easy switch to make, but a lot of businesses miss that. And the other one, which is one I see in B2C a little bit more, is what we call like apologetic content.
Okay, what does that mean?
So again, when you see the best brands on social, they've already sort of built their tribe, they've built their sort of following, and the content that they create is the content that their audience wants to see. So I'll use an example of BoxRaw. So BoxRaw are a brand that sort of specialize in boxing apparel, but previously boxing used to be sort of dominated by your brands like Everlast, Tap Out, all of those sorts of brands. And they were so far away from sort of fashion. And what BoxRaw have done brilliantly is sort of bridged that gap between boxing apparel and fashion. And as a result, they've built this brilliant tribe. But anyway, their social content is all around sort of the latest thing happening in boxing. It's content of people sort of sparring. Like, the content they create is absolutely brilliant. What they don't do is say, here's our product, here's a customer review, here's the highlights of the product, here's the benefits. And to me, it feels apologetic. You almost feel like you're trying to justify your product and why people should buy it, as opposed to creating almost like a lifestyle hub of here's the content that I know my audience will love. And as part and parcel of that, we'll sort of blend in the content of people wearing our brand or people using our product, but do it naturally and authentically, as opposed to posting, our customer said 5-star reviews. Yeah, great. It's just people don't care for that kind of content.
Yeah, and even if you are posting reviews, it's actually then still applying your first point, making it not a we, a you.
Yeah.
Saying, if you would like this outcome, here's the social proof, but still make it about them and not about you. I think that's gold, Louis. And I think it's really interesting. I've spoken to a couple of other Coffee with Chris guests about this apologetic content. That I've never heard that term before, actually, but it's true. Actually, it's almost like perhaps people are trying too hard to do the educational piece. It's almost too much educational content, and actually treating social in terms of the brand as something that truly is top of funnel, right? And stop trying to treat it like it's actually down here and it's going to convert immediately, right? And I think there is, of course, a balancing act to be had, of course. But that's some really good advice with regards to your icks. What about in terms of aesthetic, Louis? Because obviously I know that's where the passion all began for you, is the aesthetic side of brands. What are the aesthetic things that you see on social media and you're like, oh no, what are they doing?
Consistency. It's got to be consistency. It's people who a lot of the time people on social feel like they need to post in a certain way, and it's sort of following your typical templates that you might find on Free Pick or wherever, and people try and over design for social, and as a result they just lose their website. So I always like, my sort of biggest sort of I guess the biggest thing I love on socials is, like I mentioned earlier, it's the content which I truly engage with, and a lot of the time that is photography, it's videography, it's not a design template. I get it. We're talking about two different things, and the point I mentioned last time around like things like reviews, in B2B a lot more important, in B2C perhaps less so, but in B2C especially, just lead with really good content. Almost don't worry about branding it, because your brand it doesn't need to be visual. Your brand, like I mentioned earlier, is your mission, it's your purpose, it's the kind of content you're creating, it's where you're creating it, who you're creating it with. Like all of that stuff still creates your brand. So don't feel like you have to get your brand colors in there, or you have to get your logo in the corner, or you have to do this, that, and the other. Like, it's enough. You don't have to cover off every single touch point of a brand, because otherwise it'll become a little bit messy and you'll just lose your consistency.
It's so refreshing, Louis, hearing that from an expert. It's so refreshing hearing that from you. And actually, almost, it might be quite weird and almost jarring for you to be saying not to brand it sometimes, actually. But I think that's really, really good advice. What we're seeing on social is that even more raw, authentic content is outperforming the slick, corporate, polished content. And of course, I'm not saying go all one way. I still think there's a good balance to be had. But we're seeing it time after time. Just link back to your point about consistency, Louis, is I think it's mind-blowing for me that the amount of clients that we take on, and the first thing that we're doing is we're mopping up the consistency in terms of not just their profile pictures that are cropped poorly, their cover banners, their bios, descriptions, about headlines. They're like one thing on one, something different on another. It's something that still lots of businesses don't get right. So I'm pleased that you brought that up. And of course, over designing things, we spoke to 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀, a fantastic local designer, about this before. She's a superstar. I know you work with her too. So yeah, please, folks, don't over design things. You've heard it from the man himself. I mean, what are the top mistakes people are making with their brand positioning?
Brand positioning, again, goes back to not knowing what your customers want. It's actually that insight first, which comes before anything that you create. I think if we're talking solely positioning, it's not having a true understanding of where the gaps are in the market and how to exploit them. I think that's definitely one thing that people aren't doing when it comes to their brand positioning. Another thing is, you hear this sort of word, you'll have heard this word sort of thrown around a lot, is challenger brand. We want to be a challenger brand. We want to do stuff differently. And when people think of challenger brands, they think of like BrewDog or Surreal. They're doing stuff differently. But actually, you can't just become a challenger brand. You can't just say we're going to be a challenger brand. We're going to do stuff a little bit differently. It needs to be driven by your mission. And actually, even the challenger brand itself is so vague. All challenger brand means is we're going to disrupt the market. We're going to do stuff slightly differently. But there's so many different challenger brands with different missions. So Tesla, challenger brand. Surreal, challenger brand, worlds apart. Tony's Chocolate Only, very mission purpose, mission-led chocolate brand. Very, very different to the likes of like Tesla, who I mentioned, or very, very different to the likes of BrewDog. But they're still challenger brands in their own right because they're doing stuff differently. But it needs to be authentic to the purpose and the mission that you're actually trying to drive that with. If you're trying to reverse engineer some kind of mission or purpose into what you do and you haven't got it right. So a lot of the time it comes back to forget the brand identity for now, forget socials for now, forget everything for now, and actually go back to what is it we're going to do differently and how are we truly going to drive this forward. And without an understanding of that, you're literally just plucking at things in thin air and hoping that it sticks. So when talking about positioning, it's definitely that. When it comes to brand positioning, your brand positioning is essentially made up of three things. You've got your strategy, which is what I mentioned there. It's your sort of first initial touch point really of your brand. Then you've got your brand voice. So that's how do you sound? What message are you getting across? How do you articulate that? And then there's identity. So the biggest mistake I see in brand voice is inconsistencies across tone of voice. And what a lot of people sort of focus on is the headline message. So you may land on a website, headline message is really, really strong. It may have a bit of personality. It may be a little bit quirky. As you go down the page, it gets diluted. As you go through other pages, further diluted. As you then reach out and speak to somebody, that tone of voice is like a distant memory. And I think a little bit of that comes from authenticity as well. I think sometimes people try to do too much and it's not authentic to who they are. But actually, it's almost, I always talk about sort of creating a bit of a checklist when it comes to your tone of voice. So if you're a B2C business, yes, your headline messaging is going to be priority. Yes, how you talk about your products perhaps is going to be priority. But actually, the real nice little surprises and wins come from how do you apply your tone of voice in the checkout process, your sort of shipping information, how do you sort of inject your personality and character there? And those are the things which people miss. They focus so much on the headlines, and then you get a stale order confirmation saying order 1974 will be delivered tomorrow. And it's like, oh, well, that's what you do over there. So it's those little things around voice. And then finally, when it comes to identity, the one thing that people don't focus on anywhere near enough, and it ties in quite nicely to what we're talking about in social, is imagery.
Yes.
So you could have a sort of branded web page or a branded piece of collateral, and you could swap the image out and it'd look entirely different, so convey a completely different message. And it's something which a lot of people overlook, but nailing your imagery style and your photography style and even edit style is so crucial to your brand. And it's something I even probably give more focus to than logo sometimes. It's like, yes, you've got your elements, but actually, especially with we're talking about, say, B2C brands and the ones who are so reliant on content, it is imperative to get that in place. And without it, that's where you see a lot of brands fall down and then try and work too hard with the design stuff. So I bombarded you there, aren't I?
No, it's so good, Louis, and I don't even know where to begin to pick up on that. I think that, so first of all, to pick up on your last point, photography, I think that's such a glaring gap. How many businesses are still using stock photography when they don't have to? I empathize with businesses that have to begin with, but they don't prioritize it. Go speak to Rob Dodsworth. Go speak to, there's loads of people locally that can help you with photography, and of course nationally and internationally. Of course, you must invest in photography. I think that's brilliant. And Louis, I think the other sort of golden nugget in there actually was the tone of voice. People just have this sort of wishy-washy document that they just sort of keep on their desktop and never apply it. I think a real good action for businesses today, you know, this week, next week, if they're probably still drunk from England winning the Euros, would be why not go through every single touch point with prospective and current customers. I love that point there about the point of purchase, and then they get this cold corporate message. Like, it's all of those messages that should be reviewed and refined, and always applying the tone of voice. I think it's brilliant. Louis, my one word review for your appearance on Coffee with Chris has been refreshing. So thank you so much for your time and wisdom today. Louis, where can people connect with you, and how can people learn more about brand positioning, brand dial? How can they get in contact with you and your agency?
Yeah, so a couple of ways. Over on our website, which is unearthed.agency. The website's been launched about 2 or 3 weeks now, so we've refreshed ourselves actually and repositioned ourselves, funny enough. So head over to there and sort of take a look at our work whilst you're there. But if you want to connect with me, you'll be able to find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure I'll be linked in this post somewhere as well. So yeah, connect with me. If you've got any questions, I'll be more than happy to help as well. I love talking brands, so more than happy to help. Amazing. Louis, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. No, thank you, Chris. Been a pleasure. And thank you so much to everyone watching and listening live, or watching and listening back. Really appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this episode, do give us a thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment. That's really important. I'm sure Louis will be more than happy to respond, reply to any advice or guidance that you need in the world of brand positioning. Thanks as always to our charity partner, 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀, who help local people affected by cancer, and our sponsor, Hill Coaching Company. We are so grateful. We are flying, and next time I speak to you all, England will be the European champions. See you this time next week, another episode of A Coffee with Chris.